And it's time for Uncancelled, where Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. Tonight, I'm joined by star columnist Liddle, who thinks we need to talk about the government's plan for a new online safety bill, which will regulate what we can and cannot say to one another. It's been dubbed catastrophic for free speech and a recipe for censorship by campaigners, as policing of the internet will be handed almost entirely to tech giants such as Facebook and Google. In his column for the Sunday Times at the weekend, Rob wrote, "The internet is the human race in all its raging glory, full of bitterness and bile, conspiracy theories, spite, and indeed violence. But it is also a vital conduit for debate, for challenging establishment opinions from both the left and the right." Rod says if the big tech giants instead removed the right to anonymity from online keyboard warriors, much of the abuse and threats would dissolve overnight. Rod Liddle, great to have you here. Thank you so much. So for people who haven't heard about this online safety bill, can you just take us through it, exactly what it is and what it will do?
Yeah, the government's been worried and has been pestered by lobbyists for years and years that people get away with too much on Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp and so on. There's been this concerted campaign to get the government to get the internet companies to clamp down on this, to stop people saying what they might want to say, because some of it is hateful. An awful lot of it's hateful if you read some of the emails I get. And the government has responded in its usual supine manner by going along with this. And it's come up with the idea of having the internet companies police what goes on their various networks and doing it themselves. So effectively we'll have Nick Clegg policing what we can and can't say on Facebook, for example, as he's the global CEO of Vice President, CEO of Facebook. And this is a real problem. The real crux of it comes when the government says that Facebook and all these other companies can ban things, can pull the comments when they're legal but possibly harmful. That's the real problem. That's the crux of the matter. Now, my argument is we shouldn't be doing that. Illegal stuff should indeed be pulled, but who on earth decides what is harmful? That's a real problem. And the bill would be fine if it got rid of that clause.
Yeah, and the issue with these social media companies, Rod, is that it's completely pointless to suggest that they are not totally politicized, because as soon as, for example, last year, Donald Trump started talking about a theory that the coronavirus may have leaked from a lab in Wuhan, Facebook quickly decided to say that anyone who posted about this theory, including someone like me, was spreading misinformation. Now, we now know that that was actually a journalistic atrocity by Facebook, which shut down loads of conversation and loads of investigation into exactly how COVID-19 spread. And all of a sudden now that Trump is out of power, you're allowed to post about it. So the point that I'm making is I don't think we can trust that the likes of Facebook and Google and YouTube will make fair decisions about what is considered to be harmful, because at that point, they considered talking about the leak theory to be harmful. And that was wrong. That's provably wrong.
Well, they've been wrong about an awful lot of things they've pulled. They decided to suppress, terribly wrongly, stories about Joe Biden's son and his dealings in the Ukraine. And, of course, they pulled Donald Trump's comments completely. So the president of the USA was left for a month without any social media network to talk to. And that's simply because they disagreed with him. But it's worse than that. And COVID gives us an insight into how bad it's been. Yeah, you're dead right, Dan. They did indeed clamp down on people saying that this could possibly be created by a lab in Wuhan. And it could. We now know that it is possible that happened. They've also clamped down on anybody who suggested that there was a link between the AstraZeneca vaccine and blood clots. Now, I'm not an anti-vaxxer at all, and I've had my AstraZeneca jab. But there was a link between AstraZeneca and blood clots. It's not a maybe about it. There was one, and it was later proved. And at the same time, they're doing the same thing about everything to do with COVID. COVID's a good indication of what they will do, that if they don't agree with it, if the establishment doesn't agree with it, then it won't be allowed to be said. And I think that's dangerous in a democracy. This is a time when we need free and open debate more than ever before.
I completely agree with that. Do you think why the government has done this, Rod, though, is to protect young and vulnerable people on the internet? So, for example, I'm thinking about kids at school, and you have loads of example of revenge porn being posted on Facebook. And while you could argue that's illegal, to go through a legal process takes time, and for those teenagers, they don't necessarily have the time when it comes to their mental health. So the government's saying to the likes of Facebook, actually, you've got to protect young users from what other people in their peer groups could post about them.
You've got to be 18 to be on Facebook. That's what the internet people need to do better. They need to, I would suggest, remove anonymity from people so that everyone stands by what they say. And I promise you that will cut down the amount of hatred and bile and threats that you get on Facebook immediately. The second thing is they ought to make sure that they're of the right age to be doing it. And if they're not, then maybe we should prosecute Facebook. Because that's the way around it. But yes, you're right, to a degree. One of the things that the government is trying to do is protect young people. But that's not all of it, not by a very, very long chalk.
No, and I completely agree about the point when it comes to anonymity, because it would solve everything. But we know that the reason why the tech giants don't want to go down that path is it would destroy their business model, because loads of people simply sign up to use social media so that they control. That's all it's about.
That's it, yes, that's it exactly. But that's who we need to be getting tough with. We don't need to be getting tough with the people who use social media. We need to be getting tough with the companies that run it, and just handing over to them a carte blanche arrangement whereby they decide what is politically correct or not is not the way to do it. And it's dangerous for democracy. I can't say this enough. This is a fraught time for us with a pandemic, and the public needs to know what's going on. And if you try to suppress views, they come back in even bigger form as conspiracy theories. It is a very, very difficult time for us, and we need to have total and utter freedom of speech.
I agree with that. I think one of the problems with the tech giants, though, Rod, is at the moment they do operate like the Wild West. And do you know, they don't even necessarily listen to the police when the police tell them to take down content.
No, well, I hope they don't, actually, because I don't think the police should be involved in this unless that content is illegal. We've had too many cases as well of the police getting themselves very interested in stuff which happens on the internet, not remotely interested in the stuff which happens when your house is burgled or you're stabbed in the street.
I'm actually talking about genuinely illegal material.
Yeah, sure.
Death threats,
Absolutely.
threats to people's lives. And I've actually seen examples where Facebook and Instagram and Twitter will not take action. So there's an issue with those social media companies, I agree. And it's not simple to solve, is it, Rod? That's the issue. There's not a simple solution.
It is quite simple if you had anonymity. If you get rid of anonymity, that really would do it. And that's not terribly difficult for Facebook to do. If you make sure that everyone's URL, everyone's password, everyone's name, and that name corresponds to their reality in life, then you begin to lose anonymity. And I'm telling you that the crimes that are committed on the internet would reduce immediately.
I completely agree with that. Well, look, I want to bring in our panel, Rod. We have Dawn Neeson here tonight, Darren Grives, and also Becca Hudson, who in her many roles at GB is also the head of digital here. So Becca, I'm interested in your view on this one.
So, I agree the bill isn't perfect, but these platforms where we live our lives. It's where we get our information. It's where you build relationships. It's how you keep in touch with people. It's where you store the memories of a lifetime. You know, when you think about how many photos you'll have on your Facebook account by the time you die, you know, it literally chronicles your life. And we give them so much data and they make so much money out of us. The exchange has to be that they keep us safe. And, you know, you guys are both right that, you know, the internet is an incredible conduit for society, but we don't just, society is not a free-for-all. There are rules of engagement, there are things you can and can't say, and these platforms need to enforce it. And I think there's a huge safeguarding responsibility that these platforms have. I mean, Dan, you know, you say it perfectly, you know, people receive death threats, rape threats, you know, the kind of sinister materials that are shared on a kind of daily basis, and these platforms are kind of impotent to do anything about it, whereas this kind of bill actually enables them to take action. I would love to de-anonymise everyone on the internet, but as you point out, that's quite contrary to their business model. So instead, the exchanges, they get these powers, but at least it keeps us safe.
I mean, Rod, what about that? I mean, how would you deal with, for example, a public figure receiving a rape threat online? Because at the moment, it wouldn't be a given that the social media platforms would agree to remove it. And presumably that's what this bill is looking to do.
I prosecute them. It's very simple. There's a law against it. You use that law and you prosecute, and that's what we should do. The crucial thing about this particular act is that phrase which I said: legal but harmful. And it's who decides what's harmful. And I'm afraid the unpleasant answer we're all being given at the moment is Nick Clegg, which isn't something which cheers me up at all. That's the problem with it. You know, I have no problem with the internet companies getting rid of stuff which is illegal. They should do that, and we should prosecute when it becomes a crime. We should do that. But that isn't the point. The point is the other stuff. The point is asking the question: do I have a risk from this vaccine? You know, that's the crucial issue. Do I have a risk from this vaccine? Was that virus manufactured in Wuhan? You know, those are the questions which we should be talking about, and which in the past the social media companies have decided are harmful, legal but harmful.
Yeah, and you're right. By their censorship, all they're actually doing is pushing these conversations to sort of the new social network platforms, which are the likes of Signal and Telegram, and to a lesser extent WhatsApp, where people feel that they can have free and frank discussions without censorship becoming involved. Darren Grimes, what comment or question for Rod on this?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm just going to clap like a sort of adoring seal, because I completely agree with Rod. I think actually I'm worried that the fact that I think a good example would be to say that in the 90s, when I was born, the World Health Organization said that homosexuality was a mental illness. So were I to have tweeted in the 90s, and thank God it didn't exist, I tell you what, I had quite a happy childhood. But the fact of the matter would be, were I to have tweeted being gay is not a mental health disorder, I would have been censored for saying that, because Facebook and all the rest of it would have said, well, actually, according to the World Health Organization, that is factually incorrect. So I think that's a good example, Rod, of highlighting the way in which this sort of legislation will actually just be a cover.
Of course, you're dead right, Darren, and it's a great example of the way in which things which were truths suddenly become non-truths. You know, and that's what we've seen, and it's a perfect prism, COVID, for looking at what the tech companies do, and we've been through it, and both Dan and I have talked about the various things which they've tried to stop, but various things which they've stopped us from saying on Facebook and on WhatsApp and on Instagram, the things they've stopped us saying have later turned out to be true, or they've later turned out to be possibly true. So that's the real problem.
Dawn, what's your view on this?
I just want, we're talking about these companies like they are sort of like not run by people. I mean, who are the people actually doing the censoring? They appear to be a load of woke kids somewhere in California, from what I can work out.
That's the truth, or they're woke offshoots in central London.
Yeah, and this actually happened to me. I mean, I made a comment about being a woman, a biological fact about being a woman, on Twitter and don't ever go there because it's really painful. And I was threatened with sexual assault by another woman who just happened to obviously have a penis. And I was the one that was investigated for stating a biological fact. This person that threatened me wasn't. Now, I was found not guilty of talking about being a woman as a woman. And I just thought, hold on a minute.
What, you were investigated by Twitter internally?
Yeah, on Twitter, absolutely, yeah. For stating a biological fact about being a woman. And then I was threatened with sexual assault by another woman over my tweet. And I was the one that was investigated. And I think that says everything I need to know about what goes on with these companies.
That's exactly right, and it's an appalling thing. But COVID aside, that is exactly one of the areas where, if, for example, I stated, well, much as you would state that a woman is an adult female and doesn't possess a penis, I would be reported to Facebook and I would be stopped. You know, that's what would happen. That's something which is legal. It's only just legal, frankly, at the moment. But they would consider it harmful.
And so, Rod, presumably, though, this online safety bill is going to go through if it's got Tories, if it's going to. There doesn't seem to be any major Tory backbench opposition to it.
Well, there's some Tory backbench opposition to it. The reliably decent MP for Halton, Price and Howden, David Davis, is waging a sort of rearguard action against this, much as he did brilliantly. And I worked with him on this particular one a few years ago, where we tried to get the words insulting out of the hate crimes bill, so that we are allowed to insult people. Insulting people being my number one hobby. It was a self-interested act, really, on my part. But we did manage to get the word to give insult or offence to someone removed from the hate crimes bill, which is absolutely vital, and I stood alongside Rowan Atkinson and people like John Cleese to make sure that comedians still have the chance to tell jokes, for example. And I'm afraid the government is going down the same kind of path with this particular legislation, and it needs to make sure it listens to people like David Davis pretty urgently. And, I would argue that, but of course it won't. Why don't organisations like Liberty become involved? Liberty should be there to protect our freedom of speech, but it never does.